Josef Fritzl doesn't want the world to see his face. What he did for 24 years in the cellar of the family home is all too well known. It was a bizarre spectacle as he was led into the dock.
On April 19th, 2008, a nervous 73-year-old man arrived at an Austrian hospital carrying an unconscious 19-year-old girl. Doctors rush over and are immediately horrified. Her skin is translucent white, like she's never seen sunlight. Her teeth are rotting, and she looks decades older than 19. But the true horror set in when they checked the database and found nothing on her. No birth certificate, no school records, nothing. This girl existed physically, but she was a ghost on paper. They were about to discover she was the key to unlocking a 24-year-old nightmare hidden right beneath their feet. To the residents of Amstetten, 73-year-old Josef Fritzl was just a grumpy but respectable pensioner. A retired electrical engineer, he was a man with a sharp technical mind who owned a few properties and mostly kept to himself. The kind of man who went to Thailand for holidays and ran his rental units with strict German efficiency. He and his wife, Rosemary, had been married since 1956, with 7 kids in a bustling, typical Austrian home. The outside world saw an old man who paid his taxes and kept his lawn tidy, living at 40 Ibsestrasse. Neighbors said he was polite. A little controlling maybe, but polite. That's it. But here's the thing. That mundane exterior was a carefully constructed mask. Because while the town saw a hard-working landlord, they had no clue that this nice old man had already shown his true face decades earlier, and the legal system had let him get away with it. The seeds of evil. Born in 1935, right into the chaos of Nazi Germany.
Was born on April 9th, 1935 in a small town of Amstetten, Austria.
His father abandoned the family when Josef was 4, and he was left in the care of a mother who tormented him, beating him until he bled and screaming that he was Satan, over and over. The abuse was relentless, but years later, Josef would get his revenge by locking his abusive mother in an attic until her death. But he didn't break the cycle of abuse. Instead, he had perfected it, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. That opportunity came in 1967, when Josef, the respectable engineer, broke into the home of a 24-year-old nurse, held a knife to her throat, and assaulted her. He was caught, convicted, and sentenced to 18 months in prison, but he only served 12 months. The system saw it as a one-time lapse in judgment. They were wrong. Years later, during psychological evaluations, Josef sent chills down investigators' spines by claiming that he was born to violate women, and he had been restraining himself for a long time. Prison didn't fix him. It just gave him time to think, time to plan. He realized that it was too risky to continue hunting strangers, and in order to express his dark side freely, he needed a victim who couldn't call the police. By 1978, Josef had a plan and the perfect cover story. The Cold War was in full swing, and everyone was terrified of nuclear fallout. So when he started hauling tons of concrete and steel into his basement, nobody questioned it. He told his wife and neighbors that he was building a fallout shelter, a little safety measure for the family. Except fallout shelters don't need 500-kilogram reinforced concrete doors hidden behind shelves. And they most certainly don't need complex, remote-controlled electronic keypads that only one person knows the code to. But as the concrete set, one thing was certain. He wasn't building a shelter designed to keep threats out. He was building a prison designed to keep something in. He spent years perfecting this trap. And then, in January of 1983, he got lucky, and the perfect excuse fell into his hands. His daughter Elisabeth actually ran away to Vienna with a friend, trying to escape his abuse, but the police found her 3 weeks later and brought her back. This was perfect for Josef. Now that he had a documented history of her running away, when she disappeared for good, he knew exactly what story the police would believe. The trap. By August 28, 1984, the cage was finished. Elisabeth, now 18 years old, had big dreams. She wanted to become a waitress and build a life far away from her father's tyranny. She wanted to be free. To trap Elisabeth, Josef didn't drag her down there kicking and screaming. He knew better, so he used her own kindness against her. He asked her to help him hang a door in the basement.
Hey, hang up the phone. I need your help with something.
Claiming it was too heavy for him to manage alone. It seemed like a simple chore, so she went down and held the door in place, steadying the metal frame like he asked. Then, Josef slammed it shut. The heavy steel locked into place, sealing the world away. Before she could even process what was happening, he was on her, pressing an ether-soaked towel over her face. The last thing she saw was her father, the man who was supposed to protect her, fading into the dark. When she woke up, the door was locked, and it wouldn't open again for 24 years. The cult lie. While Elisabeth sat in the dark, terrified, wondering if anyone was coming to save her, Josef was upstairs, working on the next phase of his plan. He knew a missing 18-year-old would lead to a manhunt, so he forced Elisabeth to write a letter.
Fritzl forced his daughter to write a letter.
One that would stop the police from pursuing the case. In the handwritten note, she said she'd run away to join a cult because she was tired of living with her family, warning her parents not to look for her, or she'd leave the country entirely. To the police, this made perfect sense. She'd run away to Vienna just the year before, so all they saw was a rebellious teenager who didn't want to be found, and they closed the case, ending the investigation before it even began. Elisabeth was trapped just a few feet beneath the officer's boots, and they had no idea. With the world above convinced she was gone, Elisabeth's reality shrank to a cramped, windowless concrete box. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system and the heavy thud of the electronic lock disengaging. For the first 4 years, she was completely alone. Josef visited almost daily, bringing food and supplies. But he brought something far worse. He treated the dungeon like his own world, with him as a god, where he could act on his most sinister impulses unimpeded. And in a twisted attempt to detach himself from his own monstrosity, he later admitted that he would never look Elisabeth in the face during these assaults. He wanted the control, but he couldn't handle the humanity of his victim. For Elisabeth, the only thing worse than his presence was the terrifying loneliness when he left, leaving her in the darkness. Just when she thought the isolation would never end, her reality shifted violently, turning her lonely hell to a shared one. In 1988, after 4 years of captivity, the first baby was born. Josef refused to take her to a hospital. Instead, he tossed her a bottle of disinfectant, a dirty pair of scissors, and a book on childbirth from the 1960s, telling her to figure it out. Imagine giving birth alone on a cold, hard floor. No doctor, no nurse, not even a clean towel. Against all odds, Elisabeth delivered a daughter, Kirsten, and 2 years later, a son, Stefan. These children brought much-needed love into her hellish world, but they also brought fear. How could she raise innocent lives in a damp tomb where they'd never see the sun, feel the rain, or breathe fresh air? By 1993, the cellar was becoming dangerously overcrowded. With a third child, Lisa, and then a fourth, Monica, on the way, Josef realized his secret world was running out of oxygen. And since he couldn't exactly call a contractor, he needed a solution that wouldn't expose his crime. So he decided to hide them in plain sight. One night, he took baby Lisa upstairs and placed her in a box on his own front porch. Beside the crying infant, he left a note, forged by Elisabeth again, claiming she couldn't care for the child and asking her parents to take her in. Rosemary, his wife, found the baby and, believing the story, took the child in and raised her as a granddaughter. Josef repeated this miracle with Monica the following year. The neighbors marveled at the saintly grandparents taking in these abandoned children. The lie had worked twice. Josef felt invincible, and, whether it was blind faith or willful ignorance, nobody asked questions. But secrets this dark always come with a price, and soon, Josef would pay that price in innocent blood. The darkest hour. If there's a rock bottom in hell, Elisabeth found it in May 1996. Alone in that concrete box, she gave birth to twins.
This time she is expecting twins and the birth goes very bad.
Michael and Alexander. Alexander cried out with healthy lungs, but his brother Michael struggled for every breath as the infant was suffering from severe respiratory issues, gasping for air in the damp, moldy cellar. Elisabeth begged her father for mercy, pleaded with him to take the baby to a hospital to get him the oxygen he desperately needed. Josef refused. He looked at his dying grandson and decided the risk of exposure was greater than the value of a human life. And 3 days later, Michael died in his mother's arms. And what Josef did next proved that he was more monster than man. Instead of letting Elisabeth bury her son, he took the tiny, lifeless infant upstairs to the main house, and while his wife was likely in the next room, going about her day, Josef placed Michael's body into the kitchen stove and incinerated him. While Elisabeth drowned in her grief, the world directly above her head lived on. Josef didn't just hide this secret from his wife. He hid it from the dozens of people who lived in his house. Over the 24 years of captivity, over 100 tenants rented the spare room that sat directly above the dungeon. They walked on the floorboards that formed Elisabeth's ceiling and slept just feet away from where 3 children were growing up in captivity. Sometimes, they got dangerously close to discovering Josef's dark secret. One tenant who lived there for 4 years said his dog would get agitated in the middle of the night, sniffing the floor and growling at seemingly nothing. When he brought it up to Josef, the landlord calmly explained it away as faulty pipes settling in the old house. He was so confident in his control that he'd haul bags of groceries and heavy building materials into the basement right under their noses, claiming he was working on machines to sell to clients and forbidding anyone from disturbing his work, and nobody questioned it. Delusions of a monster. Now, any sane person should not be able to do such horrendous things and still look at themselves in the mirror every morning, but Josef was no ordinary man. His actions were driven by one word: delusion. Delusion so deep it defies logic. Years later, during his trial, Josef's defense attorney stood before a jury and argued that his client wasn't a monster because Josef had once brought a Christmas tree down to the dungeon for his captives. A Christmas tree. In Josef's twisted mind, he wasn't a jailer. He was a protector. He told psychiatrists he locked Elisabeth away because she was no longer adhering to rules, and he needed to keep her safe from the outside world. He genuinely believed that by providing them with a television, food, and a festive tree once a year, he was a benevolent patriarch, and that the family he kept underground was actually happy to see him. Victim or accomplice? But this whole story doesn't add up. There are holes in it that lead to questions, and one of them still haunts the people of Amstetten. What about Rosemarie? For 24 years, Josef's wife lived in that house, accepted 3 babies who mysteriously appeared on her doorstep, complete with notes from her runaway daughter.
Dear Mom, I hope you're doing okay. I'm sorry I haven't called or written.
And even answered the phone once to hear a recording of Elisabeth's voice, apologizing for leaving the children. Official police reports say Rosemarie knew nothing. She is described as a suppressed, terrified woman who didn't dare question her domineering husband. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. Was she really that blind? Or was she just that terrified? Perhaps she was truly the ultimate victim of his deception. Or maybe the truth was just too terrible to acknowledge. As the years ground on, the children grew, but the enclosed world around them didn't. The dungeon was suffocatingly small, and by 1994, with 4 people crammed into a space meant for storage, Josef decided he needed to expand his domain. But he didn't do the work himself. He forced his captives, Elisabeth and her young children, to dig into the earth with their bare hands. They clawed at the dirt for hours, hauling buckets of soil to create a few extra feet of breathing room. They expanded the cell from a cramped 380 square feet to 590, but the ceiling remained oppressively low, just 5 feet 6 inches in some areas. Stefan, the eldest son, grew to be 5'8". That means he spent his entire adolescence hunched over, his spine permanently stooping under the weight of his father's design. The children were literally being shaped by their prison. The unraveling. April 19th, 2008. The little world Josef had built for himself was about to collapse. Kirsten, the 19-year-old daughter who'd never seen the sun, collapsed, falling unconscious. Her body had begun failing after a lifetime of vitamin D deficiency and neglect. The human body is not made for darkness, and her body was beginning to shut down. For the first time in 24 years, Elisabeth issued an ultimatum. She told her father that if Kirsten died, he'd be a murderer, and there'd be no way to hide the body of a 19-year-old woman.
Elisabeth manages to convince her father to take her to the hospital.
Fearful of a murder charge, Josef relented and carried the unconscious girl upstairs, but he made a fatal error. He assumed he could maintain control of the situation one last time. He drove Kirsten to the hospital, leaving Elisabeth locked below, praying that her daughter would survive the light. Josef arrived at the hospital armed with a lie. He told the doctors that Kirsten was his granddaughter, abandoned by her cult member mother, but this time, they weren't buying it. The medical team wasn't looking at a normal teenager. Kirsten's skin was translucent and pale as paper, revealing the blue veins beneath. Her teeth were rotting and crumbling from decay, and when they went to check her records, they found nothing. No social security number, no vaccination history, no birth certificate. She was a ghost. Getting increasingly suspicious, the doctors called the police, who broadcast a public appeal for the mother to come forward to save the girl's life. Josef tried to produce another fake letter, but the walls were closing in. The doctors demanded to see the mother. The police were starting to ask questions that a cult story couldn't answer. Josef had to produce Elisabeth. On April 26, 2008, Josef's luck ran out as police intercepted Josef and Elisabeth at the hospital. At first, Elisabeth was terrified. She couldn't make eye contact. Her voice was barely a whisper, and she refused to speak until the officers made her a specific promise that she'd never have to see her father again. As soon as she heard the promise, she told them everything. The 24 years, the 7 children, the incinerator. Police forced Josef to reveal the code to the electronic keypad, and they descended into the cellar, passing through 8 locked doors before reaching the final barrier. As one investigator later put it, "We're not talking here of a Harry Potter film in which you press against a secret door and it opens." And what they found wasn't a movie set either. It was a damp, stinking concrete bunker. The smell of mold and unwashed bodies filled the air, and the floor was littered with toys. Sorry attempts at a childhood in a dungeon. The officers, horrified by the sight, stood in silence, unable to process the reality of a family that had been in the dark beneath their feet for 2 decades while the world moved on. I am not a monster. In March 2009, Josef Fritzl walked into the courtroom, hiding his face behind a blue binder, still convinced that he was just misunderstood. He pleaded guilty to incest and false imprisonment, but not guilty to the murder of baby Michael. He hoped to charm the jury and convince them that incinerating an infant was necessary to save himself, so it wasn't a crime. Then the courtroom lights dimmed as the prosecution played Elisabeth's testimony. Not a live appearance. She'd never have to see him again, they'd promised, but a videotaped account, recorded in secret to protect her. For 11 hours, her voice filled the room, recounting every moment of the 24-year hell.
Courts hearing Elisabeth Fritzl's story through videoed interviews, 11 hours of tape deemed so harrowing.
The details were so disturbing that the session had to be broken into 2-hour blocks. The jurors simply couldn't handle all of the horror at once. Seeing his daughter's face on that screen, and perhaps realizing the world finally saw him for what he was, Josef broke down, and the next morning, he changed his plea. "Guilty to all charges," he whispered. The man who tried to control everything finally accepted he'd lost. Although Josef received a life sentence in a psychiatric institution, the physical scar of his crimes remained at 40 Ibsstrasse. The house became a macabre tourist attraction, attracting fans of the dark and bizarre. The town of Amstetten wanted to heal, and to do that, they had to bury the past, literally. In 2013, trucks arrived at the property carrying a different kind of payload. They pumped tons of liquid concrete into the underground complex, filled the rooms, the narrow corridors, and the heavy steel doorways, sealed the tomb forever, ensuring that no one would ever walk in the footsteps of the captives again. As the concrete hardened, Elisabeth and her children began building a new life. Authorities provided them with new identities and a secure home in a secret village in the Austrian countryside. After decades of being watched every second of every day, they were finally given the one thing their father had stolen from them: privacy. The monster in the mirror. Today, Josef Fritzl is 90 years old. He sits in a secure psychiatric ward, his mind slowly eroding from dementia. He is withdrawn from other inmates, a man who once controlled every aspect of his family's life, now stripped of all power. In late 2025, courts ruled once again that despite his frailty, he remains too dangerous to be released. He'll die in a cage, just as he forced his daughter to live in one. But before his mind completely faded, Josef offered a final, chilling thought to a journalist, one that should keep us all awake at night. When asked about his crimes, he didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply deflected, saying, "Just look into the cellars of other people. You might find other families and girls down there." It was a desperate attempt to downplay his evil, but it leaves us with an uncomfortable question. In a world full of locked doors and quiet neighbors, how many other monsters are hiding in plain sight? What do you think about this disturbing case? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to uncover more dark secrets hiding behind closed doors, click the video on your screen right now.